Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, welcome to the very first session in the series of discussions in this youth studio. My name is Anwar Versi, and it is my pleasure and privilege to be the moderator for this very vital session, which is Learning to Care, Education and Sustainability. It's really wonderful to see so many young and enthusiastic faces. And of course, it's very important as you, the youth, will now take on the baton and tackle the challenges, including climate change, that confront mankind. This morning, we have a trio of formidable speakers to discuss these and other issues as we navigate our way through the current anthropocene age, which is the period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and environment. As it happens, one of your speakers this morning has written a superb book on the subject. He is Peter Sutoris, and he's an environmental anthropologist at UCL London, and he says, never in history has education played a more critical role in determining the future of humanity than in this age. He will lead off our discussion. He will be followed by Jesse Driver, who unfortunately cannot be with us, but we will see a clip from his place, from his school in Bali, beautiful island of Bali, where he teaches math and social studies. And he's also the sustainability advisor for Green School Bali. Our final speaker will be Max McCabe, who is the Chief Operating Education Outcomes Fund, hosted by UNICEF. He is also a WISE Fellow, which I'm sure he is, but also I mean that he belongs to the WISE Fellowship. And he spent the last 12 months working as part of a brains trust of leaders from education, from climate, from business and government about how education can play a vital part in our journey to net zero by 2050 and avoiding a climate catastrophe. So without further ado, because we have very little time, I will now invite Peter to make his presentation. Peter, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like us to stop talking about climate change. Rather, what I mean, to stop talking only about climate change. And the reason I say this is because the environmental multi-crisis, I'm sorry. The reason I say this is because the environmental multi-crisis that we are facing is not only about climate change. It is about a number of other environmental crises, including biodiversity loss, including degradation of soils and soil fertility, phosphate crisis, crisis of water resources, and so on. Ultimately, what we face is a collapse of the ecosystem. And this is something that is going to affect us all, but I think it's also important to realize that life on planet is going to go on, most likely long after we, the humans, are gone. You know, when you think about it, 65 million years ago, an asteroid hit the planet, killed all dinosaurs, life went on. So this is really a crisis that's about us, more so than it is about the planet and about our survival. Humanity may not be so lucky. We may not actually be able to make it to the other side of this crisis if we don't act fast enough and in a way that actually helps us survive. So what I'm going to argue is that this is not really a crisis that technology can fix or the so-called green growth can fix. This is really a crisis that's much broader, much wider than that. And so I think what we need to realize is that this is not just a crisis of technology or the planet or of hard sciences. It's really a crisis of civilization, culture, politics, imagination, and ultimately education as well, and that's why we're here today. So let me just say a little bit before I speak more about the Anthropocene about time. You can see here on this timeline, this is the timeline of the sort of planetary time, of the geological time, the different geological periods, different geological eras that are measured in millions of years. And you can see on the very right, the Anthropocene, which happens to coincide with the 6th mass extinction. This is the period we are in now. It is the period which is influenced by human activity, where we are altering the very chemical, physical, biological foundations of the planet.
when you look above, you can see the scale of human time. Our species has only turned up about 300,000 years ago, and when you think about the recent time markers that we talk about quite often in relationship to education, the 20th century and the 21st century, these are really negligible on the scale of planetary time. And this is why I'm also going to argue, perhaps a little bit controversially, that we should stop talking not only about climate change, we should also stop talking about 21st century skills. Because 21st century skills refer to this very arbitrary marker of the previous century. And rather what we should talk about is educating for the Anthropocene. And that's really what I would like to share with you today. What might educating for the Anthropocene mean? If you ask me, it means four things. It means, first of all, grasping what is at stake. What is at stake is nothing short of the survival of human civilization. This means all of the advances in culture, language, literature, arts, technology, science, you name it. All of the things that human beings have accumulated over generations, over millennia of living on this planet are at stake and might go if we don't survive this crisis. If you grasp this, I think it's inevitable you're going to care, that you're going to care about the survival of this civilization that we are trying to save. And if you care about it, what do you then do with that care? Well, again, if you ask me, I would argue that what we can do is imagine alternative futures. Imagine what a future that is not self-destructive looks like. And that imagination then leads us to communicate with others about what we are imagining. Because ultimately, we need to be able to share that imagined future if we are to have any kind of political change, political action, and that's what we ultimately need. And this is also why, in my work, I argue that education is not just about schooling, it is about spaces of activism, community exchange, intergenerational dialogue that go well beyond formal education. And you can also notice in this picture that this is really a cycle. Once we have communicated with others, we might realize there are other things we haven't grasped, or that we haven't cared about, or that we haven't imagined. And so we keep moving in this cycle through our engagement with other people, and this is what I mean by educating for the Anthropocene. It's these four words: grasp, care, imagine, and communicate. I'd like to leave you with what I call the despair paradox in education. The idea that if we try to actually use education for sustainability, or for any kind of purpose for that matter, if you're trying to make education a means to an end, as opposed to an end in itself, we are unlikely to reach it. So if we're going to say that education is our way to bring ourselves to a more sustainable future, I would argue that's not the way to think about this problem. The way to think about it is to think about education as an end in itself, as a process of self-discovery and discovery of the world. And if we do that, then I think those four words, grasp, care, imagine, and communicate, will come naturally to us because those are innate qualities of being human. So if we follow that process of self-discovery, we will be educating for the Anthropocene. So educating for the Anthropocene is not educating for sustainability or for any particular political goal. It's simply educating for the sake of education. And that's really the main message I would like to leave you with. And if you would like to learn more, just a shameless plug, my new book, Educating for the Anthropocene, is coming out next year with the MIT Press. You can also find more about this research online, the research that inspired this talk. And if you'd like to learn more, there is a second session tomorrow, a masterclass about educating for the Anthropocene. You're very welcome to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. And now, through the magic of technology, we will join Jesse Driver from his forest home in Bali.
I love the word educe. It is the root word of education. It's what we as educators are supposed to be doing. And educe means to draw from within, to bring out the stuff that's on the inside and bring it out and let it be seen. And one of the reasons that I like that word is because when you really draw the authentic values from a student, they care. And you get a whole different level of educational experience. I teach a class called Greenworks at Green School, and I collaborate with a Green School parent to deliver this class. That parent has a marketing background and a background in how to present yourself. He has some interesting stories as well, and we have kind of integrated his experience into our class, with the number one lesson being, you must work from your values. And so we do a deep dive into each student's real personal values. We ask them, first of all, what does just values mean? And we get a wide variety of answers. Some people represent it as a diamond. Some people represent it as a treasure box. Some people represent it as a heart, and others have represented it as a brain. So we get really interesting conversations on what values are. We have each student pick out something that's deep inside that they care about. What do you really care about? And of course, we get an awesome variety of answers. We have students that care about women's rights, that care about the well-being of lizards, that care about NFTs. We have some students that care about the used clothing market in Bali. We have students that care about snowboarding. And whatever they choose, we use that values basis to draw the learning out of our class. So the next frame of the class is the Greenworks triangle, which is like this. And on one of the top corners we have the private sector, we have the public sector, and then we have benchmarks. And so it's a business class, but it's a sustainable business class. And the real difference there is in the benchmarks sector. And so a basic benchmark would be, is it organic food? How do we know? Who measures? How do we check? But in every different sector, or in every different project, when we lay this triangle over, we wonder who's checking? Who's checking if women are empowered or not? How do we know? And in the other sectors, the private sector, the public sector, when students put their value in the middle of that triangle, they're able to figure out who is active in the public sector that also has this value. Who's active in the private sector that has this value? What are the benchmarks? And so we use this triangle as a lens. We have students explore globally who's involved in the triangle, and then locally who's involved in the triangle. And we have them identify potential partners or organizations where they could learn more. And we have those students reach out to those people and organizations. We train the students up in soft skills. How do you write a good email? How do you get the response that you want from the email? And it is through this process that kids gain a whole new level of insight into their values. What we get at is a 90-word statement. So we get the students to talk about, hello, my name is, and I value blank. And we have them fill in no more than 90 words. And we can use that 90-word core statement for all different kinds of activities. We use it for those emails to potential partners. We can use it for elevator pitch. And we can use it for creating digital media for mobile devices to present their idea and their values and their project to the whole world. And when I part of this work, it is super inspiring. So I teach 2 sessions of Greenworks back to back on Wednesday. And at the end of the day on Wednesday, my energy level is at its highest because all day I've been just speaking with kids about refining their values, how to bring out that value, bring it out and let people see it, show it off, make a project out of it. And all day students are super engaged in this, as you can imagine they would be. And so my suggestion to administrators is to create partnerships with values-based organizations and professionals. This has been super valuable for our school. Bring in the kind of people that you want your students to be. Bring in role models. What do you want your students to do? Find those people, bring them in, surround your kids with role models. Teachers need to be able to be interpreters for professionals. So if you're a teacher, you need to be able to use your teacher skills in such a way that you can help this professional relate their message to kids. I often find myself saying, oh, let's say that again. Let's slow that down. Can you explain that one more time? So that everybody's on track. And when everybody's tracking, when everybody's working from their values, it is an amazing thing. And so I think that we need to go forward with the intention to bring professionals into the classroom. We need to bridge the class to the outside world, and we need those targeted role models to do it with us. And if you can create a program at your school that is an incubator for student projects, but it comes from their values, you'll be really ahead of the game. And the students, once they've brought it out, they'll know what to do. They can take it from there.
Thank you. Our big thanks to Jesse. I think there's plenty of food for thought there, completely different perspective. And our final speaker will be Max. Max, yours.
Thanks, Anva, and hi everybody. So could you please raise your hand if you took the time to read every country's submission for the COP26 this year? Nope, well, me neither. But our friends at Education International did. And of every country's submission, only 20 mentioned education. And of those 20, None mentioned mandatory education as a route to tackle the climate crisis. Now, 136 countries have committed to net zero by 2050. To do this, we first need to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. There's a pathway to do this, and a lot of this is through technological change. We know how to do this, but we are massively failing. But after 2030, to get to net zero by 2050 is much harder. It requires us to relearn how to live on this planet. And I would argue that this is impossible without leveraging the power of the education system. We need education to stop being this neglected child of the climate movement. So over the past 12 months, I've been on a journey working with some amazing leaders from across education and climate to really think about this. One of whom is actually Wendy Kopp, who won the WISE Prize yesterday. So we've landed on kind of 3 areas that we need to focus on, and that's what I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes and 33 seconds talking to you about. So the first is education for climate literacy. So education for climate literacy is incredibly important. We first just need to educate children and young people about the scale of the crisis. And the scale of the crisis is really hard to comprehend. Every single person on this planet will have their physical and mental health significantly impacted if we continue on our current path. So we first need to just educate so people understand this, and then we need to ensure that education actually serves as a route to empower young people to recognize they can be the agents of change. Actually, this path isn't inevitable. We can change this, and we must change this. So education for climate literacy must play this role. And actually, if we change our individual behaviors, we can reduce climate emissions, or the evidence shows we can reduce climate emissions by 20 to 37%. So individual behavior change can have a massive impact on the levels of emissions. But we've also got to recognize that actually, this isn't just about individuals, this is about systems change. And actually, there's 20 companies that have been responsible for 1/3 of all historic climate emissions. So it's not just about individuals making change, it's about us shifting the system. And actually, if we properly educate about the climate, then it will change how people consume or stop to consume, who people vote for, the jobs people take. And this is how we can use education to have a ripple effect both across the decades and also across the generations. So the first plank of our strategy is around education for climate literacy. The second is around education for the just transition. We need to shift our economic system to a greener and more sustainable future. And education's got to play a vital role as a part of this. So there are 2 sides that are really important to consider. The first is just around the green skills that we need to deliver climate policies now. So I'm from the UK, and if you want to get a new gas boiler, there's 100,000 gas engineers you can choose from. If you want a green alternative, say a ground source heat pump, there are only 700 engineers. Right? So right now, the lack of skills is limiting the ability of us to roll out climate policies. This is one important role that education's got to play in the just transition. The other is we've got to recognize that actually industries have got to decline. Some jobs need to be lost. But it's critical that it's not working people that pay the price. It shouldn't be the South African coal miner that pays the price for a shift away from coal-powered energy plants. And education can play a critical role in skilling and reskilling people to move into more sustainable forms of employment. The third plank is really around the role of education as a tool for adaptation and resilience. So our world is changing, the climate is affecting so many people around the world, and education is a critical tool to help build the tools needed to actually adapt to this changing climate. So if just 70% of girls finished secondary school, there would be a 60% reduction in deaths from extreme weather events. A 60% reduction. It's absolutely huge the effect we can have by leveraging education to support adaptation and resilience. There is a really important gender dynamic to this as well. And there's amazing organizations that are already doing fantastic work in this space, the likes of CamFed or Educate Girls, that I don't have the time to outline in this session. But across history, we've seen that education has been the strongest tool for human beings to adapt to a changing environment. And actually, that's no different when we look at climate change today. It is those that are on the front line of the climate crisis are those that have actually contributed the least to climate emissions. And so it's absolutely critical that we equip them with the tools that they need to actually adapt to this changing environment. So these are the sort of three pillars that I've run through incredibly quickly in this short speech. So we need to educate to build climate literacy. We need to use education as a tool to enable the just transition. And we need education as a critical lever to help us adapt and be resilient to a changing climate. But beyond these three measures, we've also got to recognize that education is just a fundamental human right that we should be fighting for every child and young person. So we are starting to build a movement in this space. We need to really advocate for these three areas. We need to fund them properly. We need to ensure that actually as educators, we're all working collaboratively in this space. So I'm going to be here at WISE for the next few days, and I would love anyone who is interested in this topic to come reach out and speak to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Max. And my thanks to all the three speakers. I think the presentations have been quite short, very succinct, but there is a lot. They're little gems. There's a lot to derive from them. And I would just like to finish off with a quotation from one of Max's books. It says, if just 16% of high school students in high and middle income countries began receiving a comprehensive climate education, it could lead to a 19 gigaton reduction of CO2 by 2050. Yes. 16% of high school students began receiving comprehensive climate education. And this 19 gigaton is the same amount as increasing investment in concentrated solar power. So the question is, why are we still not fully realizing one of the most powerful tools we have? So with that, I will leave you, and thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye.